The rifle was a thing of cold, solid truths in Wren's hands. She worked the cleaning rod down the barrel, her knuckles scraped raw against the receiver. The scent of solvent and gun oil was sharp, a clean smell that cut through the compound's usual miasma of unwashed bodies, gasoline, and something acrid that might have been despair. In the shadowed corner of the mess hall, she could be a ghost. A useful one. Her gaze never settled, sweeping from the flickering floodlight that threw long, dancing shadows to the patchwork fence of concrete and rusted metal, to the faces of the others. Always the faces. They were a language she was forced to learn, a constant, exhausting translation of tight jaws, wide eyes, and moving lips. A vibration traveled up through the soles of her worn boots, a familiar rhythm distinct from the heavy, jarring thuds of the others. Lighter. Quicker. Maeva. A small knot of tension in Wren's shoulders eased before the woman even came into view. Maeva stopped beside her, not crowding, her presence a pocket of calm in the visual noise of the junction. She held out a tin cup, steam ghosting from its rim. Wren took it, the warmth a welcome shock against her cold fingers. Maeva's hands, weathered and strong, moved in the space between them. Good work. The signs were fluid and effortless in private language. Wren nodded, taking a sip of the bitter, watery broth. She pointed a greasy thumb toward the rifle. This needs to be ready. Always. Always. Expression was gentle, but her eyes held the same watchfulness as Wren's. She had taught Wren that. She had taught Wren that mattered. How to read the wind, how to tell which plants wouldn't kill you, how to move without being seen, how to sign. A flicker of movement at the far end of the compound broke the spell. A man near the east gate stumbled back, his hands flying to his face, his mouth opened, a perfect black O of terror. No vibration reached her, no jolt from a shared alarm, just the silent, grotesque shape of a scream. Then the world tilted into chaos. A gaunt figure, impossibly fast, slipped through a gap in the fence Wren hadn't seen. A shrieker. Jonas was already moving, his mouth a furious slash as he yelled orders lost to the air. People scrambled. One man, his face slick with panic, fumbled with a crowbar. It slipped from his grasp, and the clang against the asphalt was a sharp shock through Wren's feet, a dinner bell rung in the quiet dark. Another shrieker, then a third, poured through the breach, drawn by the vibration. Wren's hands tightened on her rifle, but she was pinned in the corner, a dozen frantic bodies between her and the fight. She saw the flash of metal, the spray of dark liquid. She saw a man go down, his legs tangled beneath him. She saw another dragged from his feet, his silent struggle swallowed by the writhing shapes of the dead. It was a macabre puppet show, all flailing limbs in frantic motion. Then it was over. The living stood heaving, spattered in gore. The dead were still. Jonas strode through the aftermath, his face a mask of fury. His eyes found her. He marched across the cracked ground, each step a heavy, accusatory slam she felt in her teeth. He stopped in front of her, his body blocking out the dim light. He smelled of sweat and rage. His hands came up, large and clumsy, mimicking the language he'd seen her use with Maeva. The movements were an insult. Y-O-U, his finger jabbed toward her chest. The canopy closed overhead, a dense weave of black branches that strangled the sky. Light struggled through in thin, sickly shafts, illuminating dust motes dancing in the dead air. In the murmuring grove, the world went silent in a way that had nothing to do with Wren's ears. The air was too thick to move, the leaves too old to rustle. It was a tomb. Every step was a negotiation with oblivion. The map, their only promise of a future, was gone because of her. A single, stupid moment of distraction. Now all she had was the ghost of its lines, a frantic tracing Maeva had made on her palm hours ago. The memory was already smudging in her mind, blurred by the constant, grinding pressure in her skull. Was that the correct ridge? Did Maeva's finger tap 3 times for the third creak, or 4? She placed her boot down, testing the ground with the caution of a bomb disposal expert. The forest floor was a deep, treacherous carpet of brittle oak leaves. A hearing person would be driven mad by the crackle and crunch. For Wren, it was a void. She had no feedback, no sense of the noise she was making. Each footfall was a blind guess. She could be a ghost, or she could be a brass band. The not knowing was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, tightening the muscles in her neck until they burned. Maeva moved ahead of her, a part of the woods in her weathered ranger gear. She flowed over the terrain, her steps economical and sure. She paused, turning back, her face a mask of patient concern. She tapped her chest, then held her hand flat, a calming gesture. "I'm okay. Slow is fine." Wren nodded, a jerky motion that did nothing to release the tension. She was not okay. She was a liability. Jonas's parting words echoed in the echo-less chamber of her mind. "She'll get you killed." He was right. She was a danger. A clumsy anchor dragging Maeva down with her. She took another step, shifting her weight. A sudden, sharp shock jolted up her leg. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a high, violent frequency that vibrated straight through the sole of her boot and into her bone. A twig. She had snapped a twig. Panic, pure and absolute, seized her. She lunged forward, grabbing the front of Maeva's jacket and shoving her backward with all her strength. Maeva stumbled, eyes wide with surprise, landing in a heap behind a large, moss-furred boulder. Wren froze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She scanned the gloom, the gnarled trunks of the ancient trees, and then she saw it. Not a motion, but the cessation of one. A patch of bark on a colossal oak seemed to peel away from the trunk. It was not bark. It had the shape of a man, thin and desiccated, its skin the same mottled gray and brown as the wood it had pressed against. A still. It took a single, shuffling step forward, its head tilted toward the place where the twig had snapped. The vibration had been a dinner bell. It moved past their hiding spot, its gait a dead, dragging thing, and disappeared into the suffocating twilight of the undergrowth. The air rushed out of Wren's lungs. Her legs gave way. She collapsed, pressing her cheek against the damp, cold earth. The smell of decay filled her nostrils. The guilt, the fear, the chilling proof of her own incompetence. She had almost killed them. Jonas was right. She had doomed them both. Sobs racked her body, silent, shuddering convulsions that offered no release. A hand settled on her shoulder, firm and steady. Maeva. She knelt beside her, waiting for the storm to pass. When Wren's shaking subsided, Maeva gently turned her face up. Her expression was not angry, not disappointed. It was calm. She pointed toward the trees where the still had vanished, then tapped her own eyes. Watch. Together, they waited. Wren's despair settled into a hollow ache. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the dim light. High above, something gave way. A thick, rotted branch broke from its perch, plummeting to the forest floor. It landed with a heavy, resonant thump that Wren felt through the ground, a low, deep tremor. She looked toward the still. Nothing. It remained a part of the forest, utterly inanimate. It had made a sound, surely, but it hadn't reacted. Then, a flicker of movement from a low bush. A rabbit, all frantic energy, darted into the open. Its tiny feet flew across a patch of bare earth. Wren didn't hear it, but she felt it. A quick, light, rhythmic pattering against the ground. A drumming. The still's head snapped in the direction of the rabbit. Wren's breath caught in her throat. The branch had been a single, low-frequency impact. The rabbit was a series of high-frequency vibrations, a pattern, a language. It wasn't sound. It was never about sound. It was about the way the world trembled. The high, sharp shock of the twig. The light, rapid drumming of the rabbit's feet. A slow, heavy shuffle. The language of leaves was not spoken in crackles and snaps, but in vibrations felt through the sole of a boot. This was a language she understood. It was a language she was built for. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the fog of her fear. As the realization solidified, a new pattern reached her. It came through the soil, a message from a distance, heavy, clumsy. 3 distinct sets of footfalls, rhythmic but out of sync with the forest. She pushed herself up, crawling to the edge of the boulder and peering through a screen of ferns. There, moving through a rare beam of sunlight that made them look like careless gods on a stage. Jonas. He carried himself with a swagger that belonged to another world, his tactical gear, a harsh joke in this ancient place. Two of his men flanked him, mimicking his unearned confidence. They were not hunting, they were following, using her and Maeva as bait to find the ranger station. And they were walking directly toward a small shadowed grove where the trees grew unnaturally close. Wren's newly opened eyes saw it instantly, the subtle, wrong stillness against the bark. 1, 2, 3, at least 4 stills, camouflaged, waiting. She saw the scene laid out before her like a prophecy. She saw the dry, brittle patch of leaves directly in their path. She saw Jonas's heavy boot lift, poised for the one step that would erupt the grove into a silent, grasping nightmare. She saw the man who had cast her out, who had called her a menace, about to step on a landmine of his own ignorance. And she knew she had only a single, thundering heartbeat to decide if he was worth saving. The shapes were wrong. Against the mottled bark of the oaks, in the dappled confusion of leaf shade and sun, the stillness of the figures was a violation. A living thing, even at rest, has a certain rhythm. A hawk on a branch adjusts its feathers. A deer flicks an ear. These things did not. They were part of the grove, woven into its fabric like a fungal growth, patient and utterly without life. Yet they were posed for it. Wren's fear was a cold stone in her gut, but the time for it had passed. It was a useless thing now. Determination was what mattered, a sharp-edged tool she could actually wield. She slid her gaze to Maeva, whose eyes were already on her, waiting. A flicker of a nod was all the confirmation Wren needed. Her hands, grimed with the soil of their hiding place, found the object of her search without her needing to look down. It was a heavy piece of granite, half buried in the leaf litter, its surface cool and rough against her calloused palms. She worked her fingers under it, testing its weight. It was sufficient. She rose to a low crouch, her body a coiled spring of tension, the stone held tight in both hands. The oak was a giant, a survivor from a world before this one. Its bark was a landscape of deep fissures and hard ridges, thick enough to absorb the impact. Its roots would do the rest. They ran like thick veins just beneath the forest floor, a nervous system connecting the whole grove. She moved toward it, her feet silent on the damp earth. She did not bother looking at Jonas and his men. She knew what she would see. Anxious, sweaty faces, eyes darting at every snapped twig, every bird call. They were listening for a world that no longer existed, blind to the one that did. She drew her arms back, the weight of the stone pulling at the muscles in her shoulders. She put her whole body into the swing. The impact was not a sound. It was a jarring shock that traveled from the stone, through her hands, and up her arms into her teeth. She struck again, a quick, sharp blow. Then a pause, long enough for the echo to die in the ground. Then a final, heavy strike. Hump, hump, thump. The pattern vibrated through the soles of her boots, a deep, percussive warning sent into the earth. For a single, triumphant beat of her heart, it worked. Jonas's men froze. Their bodies, loose in agitated moments before, snapped into postures of rigid training. Rifles that had been held loosely came up to press against shoulders, muzzles sweeping the silent trees. Their heads swiveled, eyes wide, searching for a source. They were a wall of lethal attention, and they were all looking the wrong way. A small, fierce smile touched Wren's lips. She had done it. She had spoken in a language they could not ignore. Then Jonas's head turned. His darting eyes, which had been scanning the canopy for threats he could shoot, landed on her and Maeva, half hidden in the undergrowth. The trained alertness in his face curdled. Suspicion twisted his features into something ugly. His rifle shifted, the barrel pointing not at the trees, but at the ground between them. His mouth opened, a dark O in his sweat-slicked face. The words were frantic, spittle flying from his lips. "It's them." The shape of the lie was clear. His arm jerked forward, a sharp, commanding gesture toward the path ahead. "See, keep moving." His men hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty passed through them. One man glanced from Jonas to the silent, watching trees, his brow furrowed in confusion. Another started to lower his rifle. Jonas's face contorted again, a silent bark of command. The men flinched. They obeyed. The first man took a single, reluctant step onto the carpet of dead leaves. The forest erupted. It was not an explosion of sound, but of motion. Shapes detached from tree trunks, a silent, fluid avalanche of wrongness. Limbs that had looked like branches unfolded with impossible speed. Figures dropped from the canopy above, landing without a tremor. The attack was a maelstrom of silent, efficient brutality. Wren saw one of Jonas's men go down, a still on his back before he could even turn. Another simply vanished into a blur of grasping hands. Wren's hand shot out, her fingers closing around Maeva's arm, pulling her back, away. The instinct was simple. Flee. A shape hurtled out of the chaos. It was Jonas, his face a white mask of animal panic. He had barely escaped the initial wave, and he wasn't looking at Wren, but through her, at the open path behind her. He didn't reach for her to pull her to safety. His hand slammed into her shoulders, a violent, desperate shove. He was using her, a piece of bait, a momentary distraction. The world tilted on its axis. The force of the push sent her stumbling backward, her balance gone. Her boot caught on something hard, a thick root snaking across the forest floor. For a fraction of a second, she was airborne, her arms windmilling against nothing. Then the world became a silent, jarring crash. There was no sound, only a deep, internal fracture of light and sensation as the back of her head met the sharp edge of a rock. Light splintered into 1,000 pieces behind her eyes, then collapsed inward, swallowing itself into a profound and sudden dark. The void was not empty. Her sight was gone, her body a distant, numb weight. But one sense remained, pressed into the damp earth. Through the bone of her cheek, her jaw, she felt it, a faint, rhythmic vibration, growing stronger in the soil. Thump, 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 patient, heavy, coming closer. A brutal hand on her shoulder shook the world back into place. Wren's eyes flew open to a universe of gray rain and spinning mud. The ground thrummed, a deep and ceaseless tremor that vibrated through her skull, amplifying the screaming ache in her temple. Maeva's face was inches from hers, a mask of grim urgency carved from granite and creased with worry. Her lips moved, forming words Wren could not hear, words swallowed by the storm and the deep groan of the earth. Maeva hauled her up. Wren's legs were water. Her clothes, soaked and heavy, clung to her skin like a second, colder flesh. She looked around, her vision swimming. The clearing was a churned mess of mud and blood, littered with the still, broken forms of the dead they had fought. The living were gone. Jonas, the others, vanished. A cold pit opened in her stomach, a feeling of abandonment so sharp it was almost a physical blow. Maeva pushed her down onto a fallen log, her wiry frame a shield against the wind. She produced a strip of cloth from her pack and began to gently, purposefully, clean the gash on Wren's head. The sting was a distant fact. Wren's focus was on Maeva's hands, on the set of her jaw. They had been talking before the attack, a halting conversation of gestures and scrawled words about the world before. Maeva's movements now felt like the grim continuation of that talk. She stopped dabbing at the wound, her gaze locking with Wren's. She pointed to a patch of bare earth, smoothed by the rain into a slick canvas. She picked up a sharp stick, her knuckles white. With deliberate strokes, she scratched letters into the mud. My EAR's air dying. Wren stared at the words, the rain already beginning to blur them. Maeva added another line below it, her hand shaking slightly. Sound is mud. Maeva dropped the stick. She lifted her hands, her fingers flexing, and her gaze burned with an intensity Wren had never seen before. The signs were sharp, precise, a language of pure meaning in the chaotic silence. You think you live in silence. Wren watched, her breath catching in her throat. No, you live in clarity. You see the world as it is. We just hear the noise. The world stopped spinning. The thrumming in her bones, the ache in her head, the sheeting rain, it all fell away, leaving only Maeva's face and her stark, true words hanging in the air. It was not a comfort. It was a revelation, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. All this time, she had measured herself by what she lacked. She saw now what she possessed. A filter, a focus. The noise was a distraction, a liar that could get you killed. She did not live in silence. She lived in reality. A new strength, cold and clean, settled deep in her marrow. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy weight on her limbs, but it was no longer in charge. Purpose was. Maeva gave a curt nod, as if seeing the understanding settle in Wren's eyes. She stood, pulling Wren to her feet. They moved on. The vibration grew stronger with every step, a monstrous hum that climbed from the soles of her boots to rattle her teeth. They broke through a line of skeletal trees, and it stood before them. The Highwater Dam. It was a concrete cliff holding back a furious sky, its surface stained dark with rain and age, cracked and crumbling. Water poured through fissures and roared from the sluice gates below in a churning, violent spray that rose to meet the storm. The narrow metal grate walkway spanning